because I'm a night person, and I just don't go to bed. So I kind of just listen to the sounds of everybody. That was relaxing for me. And then we have the morning people. My God, what's up with you people? It was like 6 a.m. and I heard noises in the hallway. Oh, okay, you won the award. Anybody up before 5:30? But I really don't want to know because we have a really great day planned today, and is that? I'm sorry. What's that thing they always say? Please turn off your cell phones. Edmund or Des, would you please?
Whatever.
If you have cell phones with you, would you please turn them on to vibrate?
That was just your alarm going off, a reminder to tell the group. Turn your cell
Thank you, John. I love that. See, it's so cool. 90 people have my back. And seriously, that's one of the cool things about ABC. You know what? You always know when we have each other's backs. You know, we might yell at each other in the front sometimes, but we all have each other's backs. That's one of the things that does, I know for me, keeps me here. I want to make a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. And let's get. I'm going to start. So, I really have the pleasure of being able to introduce Eddie Ellis to you, and I'm going to do it in a little different way. I think we all know all the history and the herstory and the facts and the background, and so I'm not going to tell you that stuff. And if you really want that stuff reviewed, Google it. That's my new thing. My daughter taught me how to do that. So, but I want to talk to you a little bit about, just a little bit about me. It gets to be all about me. And this time last year, Norman's not here yet. I know he's on the way, transportation key. And Norman and I drove to New York for the conference. It was my very first conference. I had gone to jail to the women's workhouse in October of 2008. And it was the first time and the last. And I lost my mind and I thought I was going to lose my life in there. And I went in on a Thursday, and then someone told me on Friday that I should sign up for ABP. And I said, what is ABP? Familiar question, right? And she said, this anti-violence thing. And I said, I'm not a violent person, I don't need to take that. And a couple hours later, she came up to me again and she said, you really should sign up for ABP. And I said, I don't need that, I am not a violent person. And by the third time she came up and she asked me about it again, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna shake her. So I decided not to. And she said, really, you should sign up for ABP. And I said, what is it with you in this class? I am not a violent person. She said, if you don't sign up, you're going to be in your cell all weekend. I knew that I was never going to make it in that little box all weekend by myself. So I signed up and decided that I would go to the workshop. Because, and how many times have we heard this? I wasn't sitting the whole weekend in myself. And so I signed up, and then on Friday, all right, Rich, now, stand up for me. Liberated Lee, where are you? And Compassionate Chris. And Norman's not here yet. These are the people that showed up on the doorstep that Friday. Okay, that's days. And when I left, I had my AVP card in this hand, and I had my Bible in this hand. And my whole life changed. And they called me after I left. And called me. Calling me. Kept talking about support group and going, because I wasn't coming out of the house. Oh my God. I've been in jail, and my family know, and I was devastated, and my life was ruined. Then Norman called me. Now, those of you who rode in the airport, you know what that was like. Look, I'm just saying, I'm coming. I showed up at the doorstep in St. Paul on 1050 Selby, and that night I showed up, Erica, stand up. My buddy Erica was there, and I found myself again. And so AVP became everything to me. I started looking at and figuring out how I could work there. I got the job as the Vista. Sorry, Rich, I took his job. So he had 2 years as the Vista, and then they decided to go a third year, and I was blessed that I got the job. I didn't know what a Vista was, but I knew Erica told me that was the only way I could apply for the job. But as it turns out, it's okay because I really like being a Vista too. But the year of 2009 was a really, really hard year for me. There was so much, everything was new. I wasn't the same. My family wasn't the same. And I was really devastated by a lot of things. And when Norman and I drove to the conference, and AVP surrounded me. See, Jerry has a camera on in it, so now I'm not going to cry.
Right.
Go for it, girl.
Keep telling yourself that.
So I knew then that this was something that I needed to do and I had to do, and I was going to keep doing it even if it killed me. And when I get passionate, sometimes people get scared. So don't be scarred, okay? It's all from the heart and it's from the mind, because there's so much work for us to do. There's so much work. And as Margaret and I say, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And so if we don't do it, who will? And it goes beyond, and that's our big challenge. And that's why we chose the title of the workshop, being the 21st century. When I heard Eddie speak at that conference and talk about what he had been through, it made my 79 days look like a trip to Cancun. But it was still my 79 days of horror, so I don't discount it. But oddly enough, I'm thankful for it, because as I say, God helped me find my purpose in my life. And this is it. But there is still so much more to be doing. And so when Eddie started talking about the 21st century and about when people get out and recidivism, I'm going to share just a couple of statistics with you. In Minnesota right now, 1 in 26 Minnesotans has some kind of an issue in their background information. And that's everybody, not just people of color. 1 in 26 is having a problem with the BCA or the driver's license department or background checks, where it makes it difficult for people to have the quality of life that we're working for. In Minnesota, in the next year, 3 years, 6,000 people per year will be released from institutions across this state. Those are people, not numbers. And those are people that most of want to come back and have a quality of life and have the same kinds of things that we're all struggling for. It really doesn't matter why you went. Excuse me. What's more important now is that if you went and you've served your time, when does the clock stop? And I think that AVP has the power to transform the power around this country and bring people's attention to what we're doing to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what AVP in the 21st century is about. It's about, we do workshops and we are excellent. And then there are people who want to do something else and do more and, you know, want to shake some people and wake them up. And that's what I'd like to see us be able to do, is to talk about what else can we do and continue to do what we do really well. And so that's how I got here, and that's how you guys are stuck with me now. And I, with great, great pleasure, will introduce Mr. Eddie Ellis.
So much for coming out at such an early time in the morning. I'm an associate professor at City University in New York. And when I used to teach morning classes, I used to get students in the class who at this time, once the lecture started, were half asleep. So it's good to have an audience that's wide awake, that's attentive, and that's laughing. I'd like to start by just saying that this is, for me, an exceptional honor, personal honor, to be invited to speak to any national convention in any respect, of course, is an enormous honor. But especially to get an opportunity to speak here at the AVP convention, national convention, is almost beyond description. But above and beyond that, I think that it doesn't just honor me, Eddie Ellis, personally, but the honor is a reflection, as my dear friend Andre would say, is a reflection of the work that all of us do, and especially those of us who were formerly incarcerated. Sister Dimitri's testimony this morning certainly bears witness to the fact that we do, AVP does, exceptional work. I'd like to also start by acknowledging and, of course, honoring our Elder Earth Mother. In our tradition, in the African tradition, we always begin by honoring the elders and receive permission from them to proceed. So, with your permission, I'll proceed.
You may proceed.
Thank you. We'd also like to say special thanks to the president, AVP President Meg Erlander, who's not here this morning, I understand. But special thanks to her and to all of the committee chair people who are responsible for making this event happen. Joanne Perry, Pat Hardy, Grace McGriff, Judy Meckel, John Shuford, Don Kesselheim, Jim Williams. Special thanks to my friend, I don't see her, I'm not sure where she's at, I don't have my glasses on, Marge Schlitt, and of course my old friend from Greenhaven and one of the intellectual lights in the prison system in New York, and a person who's continued that work outstandingly since he's been home, John Mandela, and Terry Kaiser, of course, who was responsible for me getting here and who paved the way for this address. And then last but not least, Andre Ward, who we call Imani. Imani is faith in the Swahili language, and he and I traveled together, and he's, I guess, essentially responsible for making sure I don't get lost or stray off in crowded places. He's also the associate producer of the radio program that we have in New York. It's called On the Count, the Prison and Criminal Justice Report. And in that capacity, he's responsible for helping us develop program ideas and various guests for the show. And lastly, but certainly not least, is the brother that Dimitri mentioned earlier, Norman Peoples, who I've been talking with over the last, I guess, year or so since the conference last year about a whole range of issues relating to AVP and relating to formerly incarcerated people and where we are now, where we should be going, and how that should play itself out. And of course, there is the theme of the conference, AVP and diversity in the 21st century. I think it really captures the spirit of where we are now and what our vision, what our forward vision should be or could be. And how do we achieve that vision? And I want to talk a little bit today about that and about several other things. But who would have thought in 1975 that AVP would have gotten to where it is now? Oh, there's Marge. Who would have thought that as a result of several men coming together in a prison yard to address the question of violence and how they would be able to deal with that question, that out of that discussion would come an organization that's internationally recognized, internationally respected, and that provides the kind of a service that we provide? Who would have thought? In 1975, when the question was simply, for those men who were doing long periods of time, a little better, thank you. For those men who were germinating John, all right. I'm Easy Eddie. I should have introduced myself in the beginning, Easy Eddie. Who would have thought that as a result of these men coming together, and initially I have to admit to you that I was not among that group. Several men who were lifers and long-termers at Greenhaven were very concerned that they would be in prison for a long time and that the levels of violence in that prison were getting beyond the ability of them to deal with. People used to have to go to the yard with weapons. And I remember going to Greenhaven. Greenhaven was the first prison that I went to where I was introduced to what they call bulletproof vest. And a friend of mine came up to me, and I had gotten there, I guess it must have been about a week. I was still in the reception center. And he came up to me and he said, "I'm going to have a bulletproof vest made for you." And I was like, "A bulletproof vest?" And he said, "Yeah, it's like a regular vest. It's made out of newspapers. And in between the newspaper, it's cardboard. It's insulated with cardboard. And it's fairly thick. And you wear it underneath your clothes, underneath your sweatshirt. And the reason you need one of these vests is because of the level of violence in the yard. And of course, there are no guns there, but everybody had a knife. And with this vest, if somebody attacked you or stuck you with it, it would minimize the damage." And I was a little surprised. I had been in 3 pretty tough prisons up until that point. I had been in Attica in '71 when they had the rebellion, and I left Attica and I went to a prison called Comstock, which they euphemistically called a gladiator camp because of so many fights taking place. So I thought I had seen it pretty much, seen it all. And I was with, at that time, they used to call it New Jack, because I had been in prison less than 5 years. And I was amazed at the level of violence that occurred in this prison. And this vest business threw me for a loop. And then later on, a couple of weeks later, several of these old-timers approached me and asked me about joining them in addressing this question of violence. And in those days, there were only two programs in the prisons. One was the 12-step program, narcotics, or actually Alcoholics Anonymous, and the other was the Quaker Worship Group. They were the only two groups that were permitted from the outside to come into the prison. And several of the men who approached me had been going to the Quaker Worship Group, and they met a guy there by the name of Larry Apsey, and they started talking with Larry about the question of violence in the prison. And Larry suggested that perhaps we needed to be talking to someone who was trained and who trained other people in nonviolent, direct, confrontational kinds of tactics and kinds of trainings. And initially we, at least I did, kind of poop-hard the idea. It didn't seem to me that this particular prison was a place in which nonviolence would ever be able to take hold. Certainly from my background, my own background, does not permit itself to allow that even the thought of being nonviolent. You know, you're born and raised in the urban community. There is a ethic, I guess you'd call it, in which you have to struggle, sometimes physically, in order to survive and maintain. And I was raised in that environment. I was born and raised in Harlem, and I lived in Harlem. I mean, I still live in Harlem all my life. And so nonviolence was a foreign concept to me, as it was to, I would say, the overwhelming majority of people in that prison at that time. And our political orientation and our worldview and the way in which we viewed ourselves as well as others, I think at that period were shaped more by the thought of Malcolm X than by that of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Malcolm X used to say, respect everybody, pay attention, mind your own business, but if somebody puts their hand on you, certainly don't turn the other cheek, try to send them to the cemetery. And we believed that, and we acted on that, and we lived that as part of our internal conditioning. And we brought that to the prison with us. And of course, when you're in prison, the prison environment exacerbates human problems as well as interpersonal problems, as well as group problems, and it can be a very dangerous kind of place. And within that environment, Larry Apsey suggested to us that we establish these training workshops as an alternative to violence. And everybody agreed we had to do something. Nobody was quite sure what it should be. I personally felt like this was definitely not the answer. You know, I was thinking more along the lines of some martial arts training. But that's not where Larry Apsey's head was. He is indeed the epitome of transforming power. And the power that he gave us is beyond calculation. And so he organized this 3-day workshop that was unprecedented in the history of New York State prisons, to allow outside people to come in and conduct this 3-day workshop, allow the men to participate in the workshop from 9 o'clock in the morning to 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, to establish what they call an out count. Now, for those of you who go into the prison, you know the most important and serious thing that takes place in a prison is the count. And they do it every, 5 hours, 6 hours, every 4 or 5 hours. They do a count to make sure that everybody is, in fact, that's the name of our radio program, it's On the Count. Make sure everybody's present and accounted for. And that takes precedence over everything in the prison. And somehow or other, Larry was able to convince the prison authorities that they could count these men in the area where the workshop was taking place as opposed to having them go back to their cells, which was the normal way that programs had been handled up until Larry. Larry actually established what they call in the prisons now the out count. Out count, counting you outside of your cell. That in and of itself was a monumental accomplishment. And in fact, quite frankly, that was one of the things that won Larry over to us. Because Larry, in the planning stage, Larry said that we would have this 3-day workshop, and we'd come at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we'd work until we have lunch there. We're working until we have dinner there, and we're working until about 8 o'clock, and then everybody go back to their cell, and they'll come back the next day, and we'll do it all over again. And we said, Larry, that's not going to work. That's not how you do things in this prison. At 11 o'clock, we have to go back to the cells for the count. He said, don't worry about it. And then again, at 4 o'clock, we have to go back to the cells for the count. So this workshop you're planning, just logistically, it's not going to fly. He said it'll fly. And he went back and forth with the administration. And about a week later, he came to us and he said, okay, we're all set. We're going to be able to do these workshops. You guys will be able to stay down, and that established an enormous amount of credibility. We keep trying to figure out, how did he do that? What did he do? But those of you who knew Larry know that he was a powerful, powerful, persuasive person. And he was tenacious. And he taught us tenacity. So we did this first workshop, and we went, and he brought in the Reverend Bernard Lafayette. And Bernard Lafayette at that time had just come from had just been the primary trainer in nonviolent tactics for the movement that was led by Dr. King. And prior to their demonstrations and their sit-ins and other forms of civil disobedience, they went through this 24-hour training that Bernard Lafayette and others had constructed, but Bernard was the principal engineer of that training, and he brought that training into the prison. And it was incredible. We had never experienced anything like these workshops, and these are the rudimentary light and livelies, and these consensus building, community building exercises were something that most of us had not experienced before, and led us to begin to see alternatives to violence. Let us begin to realize that in many instances, violence is perhaps unavoidable, but certainly should be at the very least the last option and not the first option. And that if there were significant alternative options between the initial action and the violence, then in many, many cases, the violence could be avoided. Larry taught us that. But most significant, Larry's idea was that this workshop was just the beginning. In fact, they called it the beginner's workshop. And that at some later point in time, everybody in that workshop should eventually become a trainer and begin to teach this themselves. And that was a new concept for us too. So after the beginner's workshop, of course, we had the advanced workshop, and then the training for trainers workshop. And all of the men who participated in the first basic workshop, I think it was like about 31 men. I think out of that 31 men, 30 of them decided to move forward with the advanced and then later with the training for trainers, and all of them became facilitators for AVP. Larry Apsey was a giant. He's a giant. And we all stand on his shoulders. Who would have thought that in 1975, as a result of violence in a prison yard in upstate New York, an organization like AVP would be created that, according to this report, that Marge and Campbell put together. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, for me, every time I read it, it's more and more inspirational. I just want to read the relevant portion for this discussion. It says, in the calendar year 2009, volunteers from AVP USA organized 491 basic workshops with 7,692 participants in 98 prisons. Who would have thought that we'd ever grow to that proportion? There were 278 advanced workshops with 4,098 participants in those prisons, and 858 people in prison were trained to be facilitators in 89 workshops and are ready to serve on a workshop team. In 60 community locations, 66 basic workshops with 806 participants, 32 advanced workshops, and 348 participants, and 23 training for trainer workshops with 211 participants. In total, we had 1,018 workshops with 14,373 participants, 85% of which were given in federal, state, and local prisons or jails. And these were led by 1,229 inside facilitators and 651 outside facilitators. And that there is an active AVP program in 34 states in the United States. And apparently, or maybe I didn't go far enough, the international section was missing. So I understand we're internationally. I guess the international coordinator didn't report in. They didn't send the information in to Marge. So we're waiting to hear from some of the foreign AVP people, especially those people in the Gaza Strip. They need AVP as bad as, they used to say about the Lone Ranger, need no silver bullets. So AVP has come a long, long way. I've got two friends of mine, I wish they could have been here today, Larry White and Charles Gale. And they are, as far as I know, maybe only two men that I remember from the original AVP workshop in 1975 in Greenhaven Prison. And when I talked to them last year after the conference about the growth of AVP, they were absolutely astounded because the growth has been phenomenal. And in our wildest imagination, we would never have envisioned the growth of AVP to the degree that it has grown. And that, I think, more than anything else, is a tribute to all of you, to the work, to the dedication, to the years that you've put into making this perhaps the premier organization, not just in the United States, but around the world, that deals with training people in alternatives to violence. And that significance shouldn't be minimized at all. Yesterday, I heard something that I thought was very interesting. Someone said to me that AVP was one of the best kept secrets in the United States. And that's a shame, because it shouldn't be a secret. It should be, we should be heralded everywhere people are talking about the question of violence. And that's everywhere in America, starting with America's involvement in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq and Iran and all of the other places where there is conflict that America supports. But equally important, there is an enormous amount of violence in urban communities all across this country. Gang warfare, drug warfare, domestic violence, a whole series of acts that up until now we have been unable to deal with in any meaningful or sustainable way. AVP, quite frankly, from my perspective, is the answer. AVP, the results, what the sociologists like to call measurable outcomes, have been outstanding. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know empirically, just by being there, by watching and talking with people who come out of prison who have undergone the AVP experience as opposed to those who have not, rates of recidivism are much lower. I think I heard Ray Rios say in New York that the rate of recidivism for people who have AVP training is under 20%, as opposed to 53% for those who don't. So the results are outstanding. The program is phenomenal. Its longevity is beyond dispute. And now we're kind of at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads because we're entering, have entered for the last decade into the 21st century. But to a large extent, we're still operating in a 19th century, 20th century modality. And our mission, when I say our, I'm talking about AVP's mission, has been very targeted and very circumscribed and very focused mission. And I think part of the reason why we've been as successful as we've been is because we've been true to that mission from day one until today. That we've adhered to a certain set of principles and a certain set of guidelines that have kept us on the straight and narrow, as it were. And I think that that is the way that it should be. And I think that is the way that it should continue to be. But I think also that the 21st century presents us with a new set of challenges that originally AVP was not designed to deal with, but that has evolved as a result of the good work that we do. And one of those challenges is, how do we begin to deal with the numbers of people who are AVP facilitators in the prisons and who have come out of the prisons now and who can be major assets to their community as a result of that work. Above and beyond the AVP facilitators who've come out of the prison is the larger number of people who've come out of the prison just generally. Earlier, the sister said that 600 people a year come out of the prisons right here in Minnesota alone. 6,000, excuse me. 6,000 people a year come out of the prisons in Minnesota alone. Multiply that by 10 plus, 600,000, actually 700,000 people a year come out of the prisons nationwide. And for the most part, they come out ill-prepared to confront many of the things that they will be challenged with once they get back to the respective communities. Probably out of that 700,000, maybe 5% have undergone AVP, have had some AVP experience, some exposure to AVP, maybe in a basic or an advanced workshop, or both. And overwhelmingly they do much better than everybody else. And the reason is very simple, because they have the tools that are needed in order to deal with the kinds of situations they will be confronted with once they return to their communities. So AVP is seminal, I think, both to the prison experience and to the reentry experience. And while it may be right now the best kept secret in the United States, I think that we have to begin to put that message out. We have to begin to spread that message. We were very fortunate 2 years ago to, one of the men that I worked with 2 years ago was very fortunate to have an opportunity to talk with the then candidate for president of the United States, Barack Obama. And he came to that meeting by way of the political work that he had done in Philadelphia. I met a sister here earlier today. She told me she was from Philadelphia, and I forgot to ask her, you know Malik Aziz? You don't know Malik Aziz? You're not a true Philadelphian. Oh, okay. Malik Aziz is a legend in Philadelphia. He's a former gang member, formerly incarcerated, considered to be a violent criminal nature, spent time in prison, came out, and turned his entire life around. He's a very persuasive speaker. And ultimately, he became a special assistant to the mayor of Philadelphia for what at that time they called ex-offender affairs. It has since been renamed to the Office of Reentry. And from that point until this point, Malik Aziz served under 4 consecutive mayors in the city of Philadelphia as their advisor with regard to formerly incarcerated men and women and some of their needs in terms of housing, in terms of employment, in terms of health care, in terms of education. And as a result of that relationship in that office, a specially created office for formerly incarcerated men and women that Malik headed up, several other cities, Chicago and DC and Boston, also created offices of a similar nature. And we've been struggling with the city administration in New York, supposed to be the most progressive city in the world, to establish an office of that kind there. And unfortunately, we haven't made much progress, but we're hoping that in the future we will. But Malik Aziz had an opportunity to meet with then candidate Barack Obama. And he persuaded Obama that one of them, and he didn't really need to do that much persuading, he said, he persuaded the candidate that one of the things that needed to happen in a new administration was a renewed focus on the numbers of people that were coming out of prison and the development of some programs and some services that would ensure public safety and guarantee that when these people came out, there would be a structured environment for them to enter into that allowed for their successful transition from prison to community. And the candidate, as I understand it, said, I understand the problem all too well. He said, I'm from Chicago, and we've got that problem in Chicago perhaps to as great, if not a greater degree than anywhere else in the country, and especially as it relates to the questions of violence and gangs. And if I'm elected, no, he said, when I'm elected, he said, this will be a priority for my administration. And as Malik tells the story, the day after the election in November, he got a call from a senior member of the White House staff, or senior member of the campaign staff at that time, who has since become a senior member of the White House staff and is probably the president's #1 political advisor. And he said, I'm just calling on behalf of President-elect Obama. And he asked me to call to remind you that he had not forgotten about the talk you had with him several months ago. And he'd like you to come to Washington and help begin to put together a summit meeting that would address this particular issue. I found that to be absolutely phenomenal. And Malik Aziz called my office and left a message that said, we've been invited to the White House to plan a summit meeting. Call me. And when I got the message, I thought it was a joke. Either somebody in my office is playing a joke here, or Malik is playing a joke. I mean, I know the guy wants me to call him, and sometimes I'm a little derelict in returning phone calls, but this is going a little too far. In terms of just trying to get me to call this. So I call him, and he gives me the story. I had not heard the story up until then. And he told me how it all developed. He said, we've been invited to Washington to sit down and talk with some of the Obama administrative top people. And he started naming all the people, and they were all the top people. And I'm not an easy guy to impress, but I was impressed. And Malik went to Washington for the first meeting, and then he brought us down for the second meeting. He said, I want you to help me put together a group of men and women from around the country who are formerly incarcerated, who run their own organizations, who would want to be part of this summit conference. And White House people have asked me to put together a comprehensive proposal for how to deal with this issue. And I said, well, it just so happens that we've got a comprehensive proposal that we've been waiting to share with somebody. And since you asked, we'll share it with you, and maybe you can share it with Barack Obama. And he said, no problem. So we dusted off this National Jobs Program. Initially, we called it the New Urban Marshall Plan. And the New Urban Marshall Plan was constructed with three basic elements. One was, most of you are not old enough to remember the Marshall Plan. That took place like after World War II. It's probably before most of you were born. But the New Urban Marshall Plan, well, whenever I talk to younger audiences like this, I have to preface those remarks. Because when you say World War II, they look at you like, wow. And if you're not talking Vietnam or later, historically, they missed the mark. They don't have a frame or point of reference. And as I look around the audience, that seems to be the situation here. So and then of course I'm an adjunct professor, so I'm into my professorial. I always use the opportunity to throw a little history and enlighten the students, and hopefully you young people will be a little bit more conscious of the role of history. But right after World War II, Europe was decimated. The United States had a massive economic effort into physically rebuilding Europe, particularly England and France and Italy, and to a great extent Germany. And this effort was both economic and political and social. And it rebuilt homes, it rebuilt factories, put people back to work, and developed a European economy that is perhaps second only to the economy of the United States today. In some places, particularly in Germany, that economy for many, many years was even stronger than the American economy. So we took the fundamental principles of this European Marshall Plan. It's named after a guy by the name of George Marshall. We named ours after Thurgood Marshall. New Urban Marshall Plan. And we infused in it many of the ideas that came out of the Depression era response to unemployment. Again, I know most of you are not old enough to remember WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. But they were two public works projects, perhaps the largest and the most successful public works projects in American history that rebuilt the infrastructure, that built the infrastructure of the United States. Highways, roads, bridges, schools, dams. And they made work for people who, at that time, 35% of the people in this country were unemployed, and the numbers were rising. So we took this WPA program and we fused it with the Marshall Plan, European Marshall Plan, and we called it the New Urban Marshall Plan. And we dusted it off and we changed some of the numbers and we gave it to Malik and he passed it on to the folks at the White House. And they said they wanted to convene this summit meeting and they wanted to do it right away. And the deadline that they gave us was too soon for us to meet, like within 90 days or so. It's just impossible for us to organize it in that period of time. And retrospectively, as I look back, I'm sorry that we missed that opportunity and that we didn't really move forward with it as fast as we could have or should have. Because at the federal government level, I found out, unfortunately, the window of opportunity, very, very narrow. And we had a window of opportunity to move forward with this plan, and we weren't prepared to do it at the time. And so they said, all right, don't worry about it. Let's do it in 6 months. And we said, you're talking about a national conference at the White House. We know we got to dot the I's, and they dropped the whole works in our lap. First time in the history of the United States that a national conference at the White House would be planned by formerly incarcerated people, and we were very concerned that it be done, 100% correctly, because if we made one mistake, of course, we would be rolled over the coals. And we just felt we needed more time to plan it and make it perfect. And so we asked for more time, and they said, all right, we'll give you some more time. And then in the interim, healthcare legislation came along. And healthcare legislation consumed the administration for the next year. And then after that, the upcoming climate, the conference on climate came along. And they were consumed with that, and we got moved further and further down the list of priorities. And while they were dealing with the climate issue, the issue of immigration came up. And we got moved back another notch. And while they were dealing with those issues, they were also planning to roll out one of the most comprehensive regulatory pieces of legislation with regard to the financial industry. And that came out. And we got pushed back a little further. And then not too long ago, we sat down with them and we talked, and they said, well, we're just about ready to, are you guys ready? And we said, we're ready, we've been moving. And then British Petroleum interceded. And we're not sure how long that's going to last. But my point really is that this window of opportunity is very small, and if you don't take advantage of it, sometimes it closes and you can't open it up again, even though both parties, certainly I believe the people in the White House as well as us, have the best of intentions. But so many other things are on that table that it's been very difficult for us to move. So what we decided was that we would take another tack. In addition to planning to do something major in terms of national exposure and recognition at the White House, we would also begin to talk with our legislative representatives in Congress. And we started with Danny Davis, Congressman Danny Davis, the senior congressman from the state of Illinois, who's also the primary author and mover of the second chance legislation in the Congress. And many of you may be familiar with that second chance legislation. In fact, some of us helped write the original draft of that legislation. And he thought it was a good idea, and he helped us convene members of the Congressional Black Caucus and Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And we wrote out this new urban Marshall Plan, and we said essentially that we think that this plan should exist. There are 42 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we say we think that this plan should exist minimally in the 42 congressional districts that all of you represent. And of course, we were trying to get some political buy-in. But we also recognize that these Congress people represented the major urban areas in the United States. Every black representative in Congress represents a district that is majority black or Latino, and overwhelmingly urban. And overwhelmingly, they share similar problems. And so we were able to get buy-in from the Congressional Black Caucus, and we've restructured the new urban Marshall Plan to fit into these 42 congressional districts. And our hope is that as a result of the kind of a bottom-up approach to working with the congressional folk, that we'll be able to reignite the enthusiasm that existed at one time and the priority that existed at one time at the White House level. We got a really, really very unfortunate break, I guess, when Adolfo Carrion, who President Obama had designated as the head of the Office of Urban Affairs in the White House, was a good friend of mine personally. He's out the Bronx in New York and was a direct connection for us to the White House folk when he decided not too long ago to resign that position. So, and he was a really major advocate and a very powerful voice at that level for our work. And in the absence of him, we're not sure where it would go. But what's relevant for this, and I'm giving you all of this background, I know my time is running out rapidly here, but I'm giving you all of this background to talk specifically about where AVP fits in, how we see AVP fitting in. And this is it. Diversity in the 21st century, I think, suggests that AVP begin to position itself so that it will no longer be the best kept secret in the United States, but so that it will be on the forefront of everybody's consciousness and on the forefront of everybody's radar screen when they talk about formerly incarcerated men and women, and particularly those who are coming out of the prisons in terms of reentry and all the things that are necessary for reentry. And while AVP, I would never advocate that people are mandated or required to take AVP, because I think that it should remain completely voluntary. I think that in terms of the larger picture, it has a significant place as an incentive for men and women coming out of the prisons in this context. What the new Urban Marshall Plan essentially does is provides a structure for the development of jobs in these congressional districts by identifying the structural needs within the community. Those things that in three categories that can easily be done. First is simple minor repairs, paint beautification programs, minor repair programs. Second phase is, and as part of the first phase, is cleanup. There are enormous amounts of vacant properties, of green fields and other structural issues in these communities. They can very easily be addressed within the next 60 to 90 days. We can put together a workforce that starts to address those things. If not, nothing more than going to vacant lots and cleaning them up and painting park benches and repairing park benches and swings and sliding boards that are not working properly. And identifying within those congressional districts other needs that are a little bit more structural. Things like lead paint abatement, asbestos removal, and other kinds of opportunities that exist that create jobs, not the least of which is the weatherization of public and private buildings, and the possible where feasible, the possible utilization of alternative forms of energy, solar paneling, for instance, the whole idea of weatherization, for instance, and the conservation of fossil fuel energy. Those things can be done immediately. And then at the next level would be the construction and the redevelopment of urban communities and the partnership between the private sector and the public sector that allows for the development of underutilized properties and properties that are not being utilized at all, and the reconstruction, rehabilitation of properties that have been abandoned, all of which we think create jobs. And our proposal to the White House was that job stimulus dollars that already exist should be earmarked for these kinds of projects, and that in the future, new money that's coming down, and there's a big piece of money that is slated to come down, should be designated specifically for these projects. And we've been trying to identify in all of these locations and all of these congressional districts, community-based organizations, preferably that are run by formerly incarcerated women and men who understand the problem, I think, to a greater degree than most folk do, and using them as the lead organization in that particular congressional jurisdiction through which the administrative apparatus of this job stimulus package would be run. Of course, that presupposes that these organizations exist and that they have the capacity, both in terms of staffing as well as experience, to handle this. And where they don't, then we are prepared to provide the kind of background and training and technical assistance coming out of City University of New York that's required to bring them up to speed. And what does all this have to do with AVP? Well, we've got this massive job program. We've got these people coming out of prison, and they're all looking for jobs. They all need jobs. And one of the things that we say to these people is that we're gonna run this job program on a first come, first served basis. Those who come first, we're gonna serve them first. But we're also gonna do an evaluation of people coming out of prison to determine exactly where you fit and how you fit, and whether or not you do fit. There's a whole lot of people coming out of prison, I tell you quite frankly, I don't want them working next to me, because they're not ready. But there's a way that you can get ready. It's called AVP. That eliminates a good portion of the kinds of problems that people bring to jobs coming out of prisons. Thank you. So while we're not saying that you have to take AVP, it's not mandatory. You don't have to take it if you don't want to take it, that's all right. But if you do take it, you probably get a couple extra points. If you do take it, that'll be a greater incentive for us that would be a greater motivation as we do evaluations, as we start placing people on jobs. Those people who have the AVP training behind them certainly, I think, would be do minimally some deferential treatment. And I think that AVP should be a national program that we encourage. I used to say that we require, but I now have tempered the language. Amani just gave me this note about language. I want to talk about that before I leave. AVP should be a national program that we encourage people to take. I think we're the best at it. There is nobody in America that can do this work better than us. And from my perspective, as a young man born and raised in Harlem, who spent 25 years in prison, there is no greater issue for people coming out of prison than anger management. Some people would argue, and I wouldn't argue too strongly against it, that the number one issue for people coming out of prisons is employment. And that certainly is as high up on the totem pole as you can get. But no matter what kind of job you have, if you're not able to control your emotions and your anger and your frustration, the hostility that has built up in you over all the years that you're in prison, you're not going to have that job too long. You're going to have some serious issues with authority. You're going to have some serious issues following instructions. You're going to have some serious issues on the disciplinary side. You know, I like to tell a story about it. I think you might have heard this before, so if you did, forgive me. But there's a young guy we know came out of prison, and he got a job, and he was doing well on the job. And he asked the supervisor about lunch, and the supervisor said, you get an hour for lunch. So you can take it from 12 to 1 or from 1 to 2. He said, okay, I'll take it from 12 to 1. 12 o'clock, he left the job to go to lunch. He walked in this deli around the corner from where he worked, downtown major area in New York. The deli is packed. He had to get online. Got online, he waited about 20 minutes, got his lunch, 25 minutes, went over and got a newspaper and a soda. Then he took a walk to the park, sit down and eat the lunch. And on the way to the park, he ran into a friend of his. And they sat down, they stood up and they talked for about 15 minutes. He hadn't seen this guy in a while. And then he went to the park and ate his lunch. It took about 40 minutes to eat his lunch. So he's 40 minutes eating the lunch. He's 20 minutes waiting online. That's an hour. He's 15 minutes talking with his friend. It's another 10 minutes on his way back to the job. And he gets to the job, walks in, supervisor says, where you been? He said, I was on my lunch break. He said, yeah, I know, but you only got an hour for lunch. He said, yeah, I know, I only took an hour. I said, you've been going almost 2 hours. I only 40 minutes. Kid says, nah, man, I got my lunch. When I got my lunch, it was like about 12:30. He said, I sat down and I ate. Then I ran into my man there. From 12:30 to 1:30, here I am. I said, that's not how we calculate this. We calculate your lunch period from the time that you leave. He calculated his lunch period from the time he started eating. And he couldn't understand, because he had never had a job before. Couldn't understand why the supervisor was upset. So he ran into a friend of mine. He said, you know what, man? Some people over that job that I work, they racist. He said, oh, yeah, why? What happened? And he told him the story. He said, he don't like me, man. He said, I did everything right. He said, but if I wasn't black, he would have never said nothing to me. And he honestly believed that. So he needs some help. with another 2 or 3 incidents like that, he's going to get fired. And that's going to lead to some serious anger issues between him and the supervisor. And who knows how that ends up. But he had never had a job, and nobody ever explained to him in terms that he could understand and relate to. That this is how I go, this is what's expected. This is what the deal is. It's not a 90-minute thing. And I think a lot of that same mentality is true for people who come out of the prison who've never been exposed to the AVP program. We've had a fantastic opportunity here to expose hundreds of thousands of people, both in the prisons and coming out of the prisons, to AVP. And I don't think that we should let that window of opportunity close. We've had an opportunity as a result of that to create an AVP infrastructure. Because in order to do that many workshops for 700,000 people a year, we're going to need a real solid infrastructure. We're going to need some clerks, we're going to need more facilitators, and we will create our own job stimulus, certainly with first preference going to men and women coming out of prisons who are already facilitators, and begin to use them to do training for other people and begin to spread the program in such a way that these hundreds of thousands of people coming out of the prisons will be exposed to that. Will be encouraged to take the program. You know, I used to say we'll be required to take the program, but I have since modified that language. I'm trying to be more politically correct. But quite frankly, if it was up to me, that would be the one AVP rule that I'd break. You would be required to take this program. But I'm not going to say that here. That's off the record, brother. And I think that when we begin to let this best-known secret out, when we begin to talk to people at whatever level, from the White House to the doghouse, when we begin to let people know what AVP is capable of doing and the lives that we can transform, that we'll make AVP into a national model. There are a lot of people doing anti-violence work all over. I think half of them don't have a clue. Sounds good, they do this little conflict mediation thing, and there's some bells and whistles, and there's some charts and some, what do you call them things, PowerPoint, yeah, thanks. PowerPoint, whatever, and you sit there and you watch, and you have a little dialogue back and forth, and that purports to be alternative to violence, anti-violence, anger management training. I don't know what the numbers are, but I can tell you, I can guarantee you, not knowing what the numbers are, I can guarantee you their numbers are not comparable to ours. Not even close. So we've got an opportunity to let everybody know about AVP. It shouldn't be a secret. And we've got an opportunity to do it in connection with this job stimulus program, to marry the two. And I think that should be our vision for the 21st century. When we talk about diversity, I think that diversity doesn't just include the inclusion of voices and people who've been on the margins of society, as well as the margins of AVP. I don't think that diversity is broad enough. When we talk about diversity, I think what we should be talking about is how do we begin to transform the power of urban communities and people coming out of the prisons using our method that's tested, that's tried, that's true, that's experienced, that has longevity. How do we do that? And I don't think there's anybody in America more qualified than the people sitting in this room right now to do that work. Above and beyond that, we've already got an infrastructure. Not like we're not in that. We're in 34 states in this country. We're in 98 prisons already. There's nobody else. That's unprecedented. There's nobody else in America. They can say that. They can boast that. So we're in position to take advantage of the way this country is moving anyway. Job creation and stimulus has got to be a priority no matter what else happens. And if it's not at the top of the list right now, it's going to be very soon. The closer we get to November, the more it's going to be a priority. And November is just the midterm mark. November 2010 is the midterm mark. For the people we're talking to, the real deal is in 2012. They got a serious problem on their hands. So they may take some losses November 2010. They're prepared to take those losses. For them, the prize in 2012. And can we turn it around between 2010 and 2012? And the only way they can turn it around, they got to put people back to work. And when they start putting people back to work in large numbers on public works projects, our people formerly incarcerated, hardcore unemployed, people in urban communities have got to be front and center in that mix. And concurrent with that has got to be the encouragement that these people also participate in AVP. Now, we don't mandate that you do it, but if you do it, chances are you get a job a whole lot faster. Chances are when the list comes down, and the list is going to be long lists. When the list comes down, you've got AVP training. It's like saying, I went to college when you go for a job. Two, you go for a job, one guy got a bachelor's degree, the other guy doesn't. The guy with a bachelor's degree gets the job because he's a little bit more qualified. Well, if you take AVP, you'll be a little bit more qualified. That's all we ask. You're not mandated to go to college, but if you go, that gives you a leg up on everybody else. Last thing, let me just close with this. I probably should have opened with it. It's about the question of language as we move into the 21st century. And I know that, particularly if you work in the prison setting, you've been accustomed to using a certain kind of language about the people that we work with. We refer to them as inmates in these prisons. Sometimes we call them convicts in these prisons. Sometimes we call them prisoners in the prisons. Oftentimes we also refer to them as offenders. And when they come out of prison, we say they're ex-offenders or ex-convicts or ex-inmates. And for the last 4 or 5 years at the Center for New Leadership at Medgar Evers, which is where I work, we had this campaign, we call it the Language Campaign, in which we've been asking organizations, and particularly national organizations, to stop using that language. We think that that language is very demeaning. It's very dehumanizing. When you call somebody an offender or even an ex-offender, there's a hell of a lot of baggage that comes with being an ex-offender. And it puts you in a disadvantageous position to have to accept that label and carry that label with you. Our experience with employers, for instance, have been when we call an employee up and we say we've got an ex-offender that we'd like to recommend for a job, they say, yeah, sure, great, call us back tomorrow. Or send him right over. And then he goes over for the interview and he says, don't call us, we'll call you when the job becomes available. But when we call an employee and we say we've got a person who is formerly incarcerated for a job, the response is entirely different. Because now we're attaching some humanity to that person. Now we're attaching some a point of identification. Now we're not just talking about a convict or an inmate or an offender, but we're talking about a person who's looking for work. So we encourage all of you to stop using that language. Stop calling us inmates or convicts or ex-convicts or ex-offenders or whatever the official language is, and to begin to refer to people in the prison simply as people in the prisons, or people who were formerly in prison, or people who have criminal convictions, or people who are on parole, or people who have whatever. but people, with the emphasis on people, so that we can begin to return the humanity to our particular population. You'll be amazed, and you'll see this for yourself. You will be amazed at the way in which people who were formerly incarcerated respond when you begin addressing them in that way. Give them a new sense of self. Give them a new sense of dignity. No longer do they have to, in your eyes at least, from their perspective, no longer do they have to carry that convict, inmate, offender baggage. I gotta tell you, being a formerly incarcerated person myself, that's a heavy baggage. You know, I hear all the time, particularly in the political circles, you don't look like an ex-offender. And that's meant to be a compliment. So I asked her, well, what does an ex-offender look like? And inevitably, there's this stereotypical idea, image. It's a word, picture, image. You know, you use the word criminal in America, and what comes to mind? You look like this guy here. So, did anybody see him when he came in yesterday? He had on some sneakers and the cut-off pants and the T-shirt and the hat. You know, your typical young urban man. That's the image that we have when we use the word criminal. He's either black or he's Latino. He's about this young man's age. Certainly not a college student. So everything in this country is formed by these images, and these images are controlled by the way that we think. And the way that we think is controlled by the language we use. You know, people who have very limited vocabularies are the most violent people because they can't express themselves. They don't have adequate words to describe their anger, their rage, their frustration. So they express that anger and rage in other kinds of ways. And the more expansive your vocabulary becomes, the more aware you become of yourself and the world around you, and the better you're able to navigate that world. So we say, please, in your writing, in your discussion, in your literature, on your websites, stop using that dehumanizing terminology and begin to use some life-giving terminology. I think that is a major step towards moving us to the 21st century. Lastly, I know everybody's getting a little tired. I see a couple of eyes starting to close up here, so let me wind this up. Lastly, let me reiterate that the window of opportunity is not big, very small, very narrow. And we've got the opportunity to take advantage of it now. We've got the opportunity to be in the forefront, still being planned. Nothing is set in the concrete. And if we move in an expeditious way, AVP will no longer be the best kept secret in America. AVP will be heralded by all of the people who are concerned about violence in urban communities, and that's everybody, from the mayor on down in every town in the United States. And we have the capacity to make that change. Question is, can we fuse a 21st century vision with our current method of operation? And can we begin to take that method of operation and expand it so that it is capable of embracing new ideas and new thinking and new concepts to the degree that it makes AVP stronger and better and more widely recognized? And to that question, I answer in the affirmative. And to use Obama's statement, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
I'm going to field some questions. You want me to field questions from you?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
session this afternoon from 3:30 until 5, and so Eddie will